Welcome to the Mindset Advantage podcast with Dr. Trisha Cardner and Elliot Rowe. So, Trisha, introduce yourself.
Hey everyone, it's Dr. Trisha Cardner. I'm a peak performance strategist, and you can find me over at drtrishacardner.com, or you can follow me on Twitter at Dr. Trisha Cardner.
And my name's Elliot Rowe. I'm a mindset coach for poker players and athletes. So, Trisha, what do you have for us this week?
Hey, I got something that's a little interesting for our psychology news you can use. And some people might even think it's a little weird, but I think it could have potential value. Recent article came out in the Journal of Neuroscience, and the question they were asking is there any benefit to the position you sleep in terms of how it would clear metabolic waste from your brain at night? Okay, now this sounds really crazy, but basically during the day, you get all this metabolic waste and these brain proteins floating around in your brain. And so the question was, they think that sleep is a way that we get rid of all that metabolic waste. So then the question becomes, okay, what's the ideal sleeping position to get rid of it? And so they actually did this study with mice, and they do plan to follow up with humans. But as it turns out, the position that is most effective to get rid of metabolic waste is on your side. And you may say, well, why would poker players care about this? Well, if you have a buildup of metabolic waste and these brain proteins don't get flushed out, it's associated with a lot of different types of dementia and even Alzheimer's. So if you want to keep your brain working at top function, you want this, it's called the glymphatic pathway. You want it to work its best and most efficient. And the way to do that seems to be, at least in the mice, and they are going to follow up with human studies, but to sleep on your side. So that's a quick tip to just clean up your brain.
And that's really interesting because obviously usually we're talking about the more psychological side, but there is that physical side as well to keeping your brain sharp, isn't there?
Absolutely. And there's more coming down the pike, as we get better imaging technologies and better just scientific processes, we can find out more about what's actually working kind of under the hood, if you will.
All that stuff that's been hidden for so long.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so today we have Adam coffeeeyay Sobolewski. I hope I haven't butchered his surname too much. He's a Heads Up Sit and Go coach, hyper Heads Up Sit and Go coach from America, who's actually trained a lot of the guys there who've been really, really successful. He's got a strong academic background in math, and he's going to come on and he's going to talk to us about the Heads Up Sit and Goes and some other projects that he's got going on at the moment. So let's give Adam a call. So Adam, if you could introduce yourself to our listeners.
Hi, I'm Adam Sobolewski. I go under the screen name coffeeeyay. I've been working with HUSNGs for a long time now, and I've been sort of professional coach for almost 4 years, focusing on game theory and math aspects, helping students improve in those aspects of heads-up play.
So for people who are listening in who may not know about your background, can you talk a little bit about, I guess, the brainiac that you are and the degrees that you have?
Yeah, well, I did an undergraduate degree at University of Chicago, and I did a double major in math and physics. So I've always been kind of a mathy guy. And actually, University of Chicago is where I first started playing poker. And so it's very good. It was a very sort of tough school. And so the poker games are actually quite tough too. So I learned, sort of first learned how to start thinking about poker from a really basic level. And we sort of all learned together and sort of grew as a home game. It was pretty cool. It's kind of cool. I was just reading an interview with one of the players I remember playing against, Bjorn Lee, who's now a heads-up cash specialist, one of the high stakes crushers. So it's fun hearing about where people ended up. But in case, yeah, so I did that. I did a year of graduate work in physics after that. It wasn't really my thing. The part I liked most was TAing and teaching. And so I taught a class, ended up getting a teaching certificate instead of a PhD. And then from there, I tried to find sort of myself. I did some economics because I was interested in poker. So I was interested in game theory and stuff. So I studied some economics, but at that point I was just kind of burned out of academia and wanted to give poker a try. Did professional for a little bit. Then Black Friday happened, which kind of threw a snag. But I got married and we decided to gamble and move to Poland. So our honeymoon right after the wedding was a cruise to Warsaw, Poland, where my parents own an apartment. And we decided we would go off and, she could teach English and I would, play professional poker. And so that was the plan and ended up pretty good. So I'm pretty happy taking the risk. But yeah, and then in the meantime, after that, I got more into the coaching side again. I found that I was posting a lot on 2+2. People were asking me for coaching. So I was like, sure, I'd love to do that. I love teaching, love helping others. That sounds great. And so kind of got more and more on the coaching side, really found that that was really my strength. And I found I enjoyed a lot more than playing. I really enjoy playing. I love poker. Don't get me wrong. I love playing poker, and it's something I'm very passionate about. But in terms of day-to-day, like playing every day, I much prefer coaching every day and interacting with people and helping others with their games. And then, so at one point too, we were living in Scotland. After we moved from Warsaw, we moved to Scotland, and I did a master's in math there while coaching. So now, just to kind of give myself a little bit of more background and stuff like that. So now I have a master's in math as well. But since then, just been doing professional coaching mostly. And obviously a lot of off the table work, working on my material, research, a lot of off the table research, as well as playing some too.
And in terms of the playing, what sort of numbers of days a week do you play, or is it numbers of days a month?
It's funny. I kind of go through phases. I'll go through phases where I play a lot. And I'll play maybe 4 to 6 hours a day for like 3 or 4 days, and then I'll take a break for a while. It just depends a lot on how sort of the coaching ends up, like how many cancellations I get in a day, how many people are on vacation, this week, how much time I sort of have. I've gone weeks where I haven't had any time to play at all. I was just so busy with other stuff. I've been trying now more to try to get in like 1 or 2 hours a day and try to make it more regular. But again, it just depends on schedule and stuff. I think of myself like at this point almost like a part-time player, almost like a recreational hobby player, except for the fact that I'm still playing for money, still playing to win. But in terms of the hours I put in, yeah, I'm a little bit lower volume now than I used to be, certainly when I was a professional player.
What do you think is the ideal for most players?
I think it varies tremendously with what format you're playing, how many tables you're playing. Because, sometimes hours a day, quality hours are sort of worth more and also use up sort of more mental energy, I think, than, autopilot hours. So I think it depends very much from person to person. But I usually recommend, like, if you're a professional player, if you're playing full time, you really should be putting in probably 5 to 7 hours of, play a day, around those levels. And you should be probably studying on top of that. I don't know, what kind of numbers do you guys see? Do you guys recommend? That's actually something I'm really curious about.
So in terms of how many hours a week the players play, usually it depends on the game type that they're playing. Obviously, the guys in the MTTs, they'll play usually 4 or 5 days a week, the majority of the professionals, but they could be 10 to 12-hour sessions because obviously the MTT guys are forced to play it. Some of the more heads-up games, they will play, as you say, like the 5 to 7 hours. Doesn't seem far off. Some guys need to split that up because of their focus. So some guys struggle to do that in one long run, and other people will split it into 1 hour at a time, 90 minutes or 2 hours at a time. And it's very similar with the cash game players. A professional, I would say, should usually be looking at 25 to 30 hours of poker a week if they're not an MTT player. And then probably around 10 hours a week of study on top of that. That would probably be optimal with them still having some life balance.
Yeah, that's the big key, is the life balance. If you don't make time for exercise and family and non-poker things, what you get a lot of times is burnout, where then you lose motivation, you lose focus, you don't want to play. And if you do play, you're not as sharp. So definitely putting those limits, like Elliot just suggested, is what I recommend with my clients as well.
Out of interest, have you seen with your players, obviously guys are coming to you, they're learning more, they probably get really, really keen. Do you see guys who then, they start playing these 15-hour sessions and then have you seen the crash happen from your side?
I'm trying to think. I see them sort of on a weekly basis. So, I wonder how many times maybe a crash has happened at some point. But I don't know. In general, I find a lot of guys struggling the opposite, just getting in volume. I found a much more common issue than putting in too long sessions, I think, overall. I certainly have had it happen, though. I've gone through some sessions where people are playing really late and their game is just completely deteriorated. And then, we were like, well, we found a leak. You shouldn't be playing at this time. You shouldn't have been playing an 8, X hour session or something. Sometimes it's just, just obvious. And these students will go through these hands and they'll just facepalm. They're like, how was I doing this? That's not me. I never do that. How did I do that? Why did I do that? I don't remember doing that. And you'll get, so it definitely happens a lot. But yeah, it's a really tough one, the life balance you talk about. And it's really tough thing to get in enough hours without overdoing it. I know it's something I struggle with a ton too, in terms of number of hours I do coaching. For me, I found it's very similar type of work to grinding, sometimes a little more intense. And so it's a similar kind of thing, like trying to figure out how many hours, is optimal to sort of do a day without really burning yourself out. That's definitely something I have noticed a lot, those burnouts. It's very common. It's really tough. I think it just goes to show that it's in many ways a lot tougher than it looks. I mean, it's really a hard way to make an easy living. I mean, it's a lot harder than I think people anticipate, especially, people who are new professionals or whatever. It's a lot harder to get in those 40 hours and, without putting in suddenly 60-hour weeks where then you don't work at all for the next 2 or whatever. It's tough. It's a tough balance.
Another thing that really comes into play that I talk a lot about with my clients is energy management. And that is especially for people who are maybe doing cash games or the heads up, but not so much MTTs, it's harder. But for cash, you can figure out what times of the day you have the highest energy. Are you a morning person? Are you a night owl? And then you make sure that you do your highest value activities during those time frames. And then you do more tedious, less taxing things, in your off-peak energy times. And so if you have people who are struggling with volume, that might be one thing to suggest to them.
That's really fascinating. Yeah, it's really tough. Yeah, a lot of people sort of struggle with when to put in volume. As sort of standard, I tend to recommend players to start earlier. The sooner you start your first session, the sooner you get a session in and you're going to get volume. And, if you get up early and you get in that early morning session, you'll feel so good because you'll have, the day will be ahead of you and you've already put in volume and you can only just put in more from there. But yeah, no, it's definitely really interesting, thinking about how energies work out and trying to really maximize our hourly that way. And again, avoid burnout. That's a great idea. I definitely will encourage some of my players to think about that.
And I guess the punishment in your game is probably more severe, isn't it, in terms of losing your focus? Because it's heads up, sit and goes, a lot of the time it's reg versus reg.
Yeah.
Any weakness that people see, I'm assuming that can really, a few days of playing poorly like that can have a huge impact on a bankroll, can't they?
Yeah. I think especially, it's interesting with the short stack formats. I mean, a lot of what I do is sort of these hyper turbos. It's the spin and goes and the hyper turbo heads up sit and goes. It's interesting because they tend to sort of it really punishes if your game is just a little off and you do it for a long time, it really punishes sort of B, C games. On the other hand, making one big mistake isn't as big a deal. I find in cash, if you suddenly lose focus during a hand and you just make a really big mistake, it can be, a really, really massive dent just because stacks can be so deep. In the hypers, at least it's not that bad. If you make a big bluff, it's not the end of the world. It was never that big mistake because that many chips didn't go in. But on the other hand, if you consistently start, I find players will start, one very common category is players will start tilting tight. If they've been running bad or whatever, they just start folding more hands. And suddenly that's just passing up on a lot of their win rate. And suddenly their win rate drops, their variance goes up. They're more likely to make mistakes later streets anyways because they're off game. And so it's this compounding of little mistakes that just add up and start really, really killing your win rate. And then suddenly you're grinding and you think you're making money. But reality, if your game's plan's so off, if your game's so far off, you might be losing or you might be breaking even. And at that point, you're just wasting energy. So yeah, it's definitely something to worry about.
Something that I'm real interested in is the development of expertise over time. And actually, one of the guys who did a lot of work with this is a guy by the name of Bloom, who actually comes out of your alma mater, University of Chicago. But let's say someone comes to you, because I know you coach all levels from beginner to, super advanced. So someone comes to you and maybe they are a beginner. How would you take them down that path to developing their expertise?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I generally recommend sort of, first off, spending a lot more of your time studying than playing, or about even. I think playing is really important for new players. You can't spend all your time studying. You got to try to put it into practice. But spending more time studying is really important. I recommend them to do a lot of review, a lot more time watching videos, a lot more sort of try to do efficient ways to build expertise. That's sort of a lot of the time what I focus on, trying to take as many little mini shortcuts to try to save yourself a little time so you can catch up to the field. And the best ways, there's learning, efficient ways to study, learning efficient ways to use the software, learning efficient ways to analyze hands, being really mindful while playing. I strongly recommend new players to only play one table at a time and really focus. When you're a new player, you shouldn't be thinking about your hourly in terms of how much money I'm making per hour playing. It's more how much better I'm getting because I'm playing. If you want to, become a good player at some point, you have to invest in yourself and you have to invest the time. And I think the most important thing is to really be active in that sense, that when you are playing, you should be investing your time and making it really high quality play and really trying to force yourself to make decisions, to mark hands, to not autopilot and force that learning process. And I found that's sort of the best way to sort of most efficiently, I found that that's one of the ways where people can move up the stakes the quickest, get good the fastest, and sort of avoid some of the pitfalls sometimes.
And in your games, there's something quite different to a lot of the other game types. There's actually a cartel system within Heads Up Sit and Goes. Can you explain what that is to the listeners who may play MTTs or cash games, and sort of the impact that might be having on players' mental games?
Yeah. So cartels, it's sort of a joke term. People sort of really, we call them now divisions, the PC term. It's not a big deal, but cartel brings up so many negative things. What it really is at certain stakes, and it starts and Heads Up Sit and Goes at the 30s. In order to be able to open sit, in order to sort of gain your reputation, to be to be a reg at that level, in order to become a regular at that level, in a sense, you have to first join this group. And to do that, you have to battle your way in. You have to prove that you're good enough versus the group. In a sense, you have to essentially try to prove that you're better than the bottom percent of the group. And the idea is that at some point, if the group's too big, they drop out the bottom percent. So people move up and move down. It's created a lot of move up, move down situations. If you're not strong enough versus the regs at your level, you are forced to move down a lot of the time, or get better versus regulars. If you want to move up, you have to learn how to play against regulars and move up. And the idea behind this is that in Heads Up Sit and Goes, in some sense, there's sort of two skill sets. There's playing against recreational players, weak players, and there's playing against other regulars, other very strong thinking players who know how to beat weak players. And the problem for a long time was that if you were good at beating recreationals, it didn't matter how good you were versus regulars, because there was no incentive system for regulars to play against each other anyways. And so the game created a spot where it became very easy to beat recreationals. And so lots of people could beat recreationals, but maybe some of them weren't as good at poker because they weren't as good versus regulars. Maybe they weren't even as good versus recreationals, but they could still play higher, pretty high stakes. And this is something that, in a cash game, you can't really get away with a lot. Well, I guess in Heads Up Cash, you can always get up. But it created this sort of a very strong game selection. And so the idea was, okay, well, let's limit how many people are at each stake. Or at least that was their idea. I didn't start the divisions, but limit how many people are sort of regulars at each stake and create a sort of merit-based system where you have to fight your way in. And that's sort of the idea, is to make the reg battles more efficient. They're used, for some purpose. You've got goals. It's not sort of like mindless ego warring. The reg war is useful to some extent. And so it does create a barrier. It creates a move up. It does make it harder to move up in stakes, certainly. And that's something that, for a lot of players is a big negative. On the other hand, it creates more reward when you do move up. It means that when you do move up in stakes, your hourly will definitely go up. There's, you'll still be able to get action, but you'll still have to play against sometimes regulars. So it's a very interesting idea. I don't think there's many other ways to sort of structure it. I think it sort of almost comes out of game theory. It's sort of a little equilibrium solution. It is a little bit collusive. Obviously the regulars are talking to each other to set this up. But in some sense, I think of it, it's just a little bit of like an organization. It's adding one layer of, organization to the regulars, for better or for worse.
So how does someone come into the division, if they're new to the game?
So they have to play against division members, and they have to play a certain number of games against division members and show certain results. And so you have to play, it's somewhere around, I don't remember the exact numbers. I think it's for 30s, it might be somewhere around 2,000 games, 3,000 games, and have certain results, EV results. So adjusted for the all-ins, because in Heads Up Sit and Goes, hyper turbos, you go all in a lot. So it's adjusted for that. And it's just certain requirements, and the numbers are picked such that confidence intervals work out well. So there's some statistical work behind the numbers. Actually, at some point, I computed a lot of the numbers for them, just so that the numbers would make sense, so that you actually proved something statistically. You played all these games, you have proved that you're better than the bottom 20% of the division. You should be inside. So it's merit based.
And how do you think that's affected sort of the mental game within your game type?
Well, it's tough. It certainly has made the games harder for everyone involved. And in that sense, I mean, you can think of it as bad or good. I mean, it promotes skill more, right? I mean, it's harder to stay good, so you have to be more skillful because you have to play against a lot of regulars. And playing against regulars is tougher, more mentally taxing, more mentally draining. Once you're in a division, you're still not safe because there'll be new people who want to get in and they might want to play you. And so you have to be able to, willing to at any point postpone your grinding versus recreational players and start playing against a regular and have to do some battles during the day. So it does create, I think, a lot more stuff like that. It also creates obviously ego issues. If you get beaten really bad by another player, it can make you feel bad, go on tilt. There have been tons of people who have gone on really bad tilt because everyone was sitting them. They were the weakest member in their division and everyone sat them. And, at some point, it's really, really tough. There's nothing you can do. You have to either get way better really quickly or drop down or, but you don't want to do that either. And it definitely creates a lot of extra mental game work. I mean, a lot of tilt, a lot of toughness. You have to be really tough. It's certainly another skill barrier.
Just wondering when they have, they get in that situation, are they tempted to just drop out completely a lot of the time?
Sometimes. A lot of players have switched over to spin and goes, which don't have it. A lot of them move down in stakes and switch over to spin and goes. And some of them get better. I've worked with players who are struggling at the 60s. They're one of the weaker members. And right now he's in the 300s division. He had actually dropped out of hundreds at one point, was down at 60s, was in a little trouble, but he wanted to get back up on his feet. And, now he's in the 300s. So it's always possible to get back up. You just have to put in the time and effort. And you have to be putting in work on your game. You have to be, always getting better. If you're not spending that 10 hours a week studying, that's when you're vulnerable. But if you're spending the time studying, it's usually worth it just to fight your way and, prove that you can beat the challengers and that you are better and that you deserve to be in your division. Play it tough. It's tough.
And do you think it's been a sort of a net positive for the game?
Again, I think it's created a lot of competition. It's made the game tougher. It's hard to say if that's good or bad. The game evolves. It's, again, in some sense, it's created more of a merit-based system in terms of poker skill. Like poker skill is rewarded more, I think. When you do get into a division, hourlies still remain high in hyper turbos, despite everyone, always saying that, formats are going to die or something. Hourlies have remained high. Heads Up Sit and Goes have some of the lowest variance. Compared to MTTs, the variance is like 1/10 in magnitude. You deal with day-to-day fluctuations, but if you're a winning player, you're not even going to have losing months. Almost, very rarely will you have a losing month, especially like post-rake back. There's a lot of value. Heads Up Sit and Goes are a fantastic format. And so, in some sense, it's been negative because obviously it makes it harder to move up. It has created this negative image with these cartels and stuff. But at the same time, it has created a very competitive environment where people have to get good. It's promoted a lot of, being really good at poker, really creating this kind of world where poker skill is sort of what's translating into money. In some sense, that's kind of, it's always been sort of my idea of what poker world sort of looks like. This kind of survival of the fittest, this better you are at poker, the more money you should make on average. And there's a lot of aspects of poker, obviously mental game. I think all that, mental game, meta game, game selection, all of that contributes to being good at poker. But I think all of that should contribute to your win rate. And in Heads Up Sit and Goes, it turns out now, I think skill is one of the major factors. There's much less other factors. Being really good is really important.
Well, I don't know. The thing I've noticed, certainly with the Heads Up Sit and Goes, I've worked with lots of players in the format, is they're incredibly professional compared to a lot of the other game types because of this competition. So they will be physically fit, they will meditate, they will have planned out their schedule for their sessions, they do their 10 hours of study a week or more, they study individual opponents. They're doing the things that just don't happen in the other game types because the competition is lower.
Yeah. And so, you can think of that as negative because they have to do those things, or you can think of it as a positive as, the game's evolved to the point to such a professional level, that I think of that as good. Poker becoming more professional is in some sense good for the game too. Becoming more like, sports or chess or tennis or any other sort of professional competitive field.
Yep, so. Agreed. Do you think that there's a certain personality type that's just ideal for these Heads Up Sit and Goes?
It's hard to say. I think there's a few different ones. I certainly responded well to Heads Up Sit and Goes because I was more of like a loose aggressive player. When I was playing other formats, my leaks and they still tend to be calling too much, playing too aggressively, bluffing too much, bluffing against players I shouldn't be bluffing against, that kind of thing. And so I found myself gravitating towards shorter and shorter handed formats because I was rewarded more for that activity. And so, in Heads Up Sit and Goes, I don't open fold my button ever. I play about 80% of hands out of position. I fold flops, very rarely. I get to play really wide, and I sort of know how to play very wide, and it can be a very good strategy. So, I think that players who like more of this fast action, you make decisions every single hand. There's no just, open fold, wait to the next hand very often. Like, even if you open fold, the next hand's already there. So there's very little dead time. It's very active. It's very competitive. And so, I think there's certainly a lot of different types of players who gravitate because of those things, because of the looseness, the fast action, and, this kind of mental game. You really get into each other's heads playing heads up. You really have to, you play the player, and there's only one other player. And so you spend all your time playing against that player, figuring him out. It becomes, really competitive, really exciting for a lot of people. So I think it's a lot of people gravitate to it for that reason.
Yeah, it really is something where you have to prove yourself, isn't it? And you're going to be running a sort of a course in Colorado. If you could talk to us about that.
Yeah, we're doing a poker retreat. And so the idea is that we're hosting people up in the mountains. It's a really beautiful location. We've got like a hot tub. It's got a ton, like 12 bathrooms, really, really beautiful place. And we're going to be providing food and alcohol and everything to make people comfortable so that we can build this situation where people can be comfortable and talk and experience poker and learn more about poker. I'm going to be doing at least like 2 seminars a day. We're going to be doing a lot of intensive personal training as well. We'll have one-on-one sessions, really focusing on, how can we become better as poker players, going through hands, talking together, and just having fun together as poker players, No matter what you do, I feel like when you participate in something like poker where you get so excited about it, you just shop talk is part of the fun. And you can do fun things like going to a brewery and talk shop along the way, talk about how we construct our range in this spot or another. Oh, hey, Adam, how would you play against this type of player? Well, that's, I would do this and this. And so we're going to be doing all these sorts of excursions and really trying to create this, kind of environment for learning and also just for having fun and relaxing and having fun with other poker players, networking, building connections. So I'm really, really excited. It's again, the place is so fantastic. It's right up in the mountains. The views are gorgeous. There's so much stuff to do around and so much stuff to do in the house. I just can't wait for it to happen.
So where do people go to find out about that?
Yeah, so we're doing it through HUSNG.com. So if you go to the website, HUSNG.com, you'll find a link to it. You can also go to HUSNG.com/content/poker-camp. It's also, but if you just go to the main page, there'll be a quick link. You'll see a photo of the house, and there's a bunch of videos about the different rooms that we're offering for rent. You'll get prices and stuff like that.
And where can people find out about your personal coaching that you offer?
Also through HUSNG.com. You can even just go to coffeeyay.com, and that actually just takes you to my site on HUSNG.com. That's where I have all my video packs. That's where I sell all of my software. That's where I do all my stuff. So for any stuff that you need, CoffeeHUD, just HUSNG.com is the best place. I've got tons of free videos up too. There's a lot of other free videos from other people. I haven't actually made any recently. I've been meaning to keep putting up some more free content because it's been a while. But still, I have a lot of older stuff that's so good, worth looking at. And there's a lot of other content creators on that site that are just fantastic. So well worth checking out material on there because they're putting up free videos all the time.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. And I hope people go and check out the website. And, it's really good to hear someone who's coaching that very specific niche in poker, which is just so incredibly competitive.
Yeah, it's a cool field to be in, and it's exciting, but it's tough. It's tough. It's tough on me too. It's hard to find the time. I'm just like every other player. I've hard to find the balance between the coaching, the grinding, the studying, the research, all that stuff. It's competitive, but it's fun. It's exciting, and it pays well.
Excellent. Well, good luck with the course. I'll actually be doing a webinar at that course as well. So you guys, if you go along to that, you get to listen to me as well as Adam. And we shall talk to you soon. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks.
Cheers, Adam. Bye.
Bye.
So great to have Adam on the show. It was interesting hearing about one of these other sort of small niche markets, I guess, within the poker world.
Yeah, I've always kind of heard that the heads up sit and goes were kind of, stay away from them. They're too difficult. They're too competitive and all. But it almost sounds like they have it set up in a way that you can actually get in and I guess work your way up.
Yeah, I mean, there's the sort of the league system or divisions that he was describing, and I think some people are actually really attracted to the fact that it is that competitive, and perhaps that more so than other form of poker, it does actually reward the best players in a way that perhaps MTTs or some cash games might not in quite such a direct way.
And it does seem like if you are going to be interested in doing the heads up sit and goes, you definitely have to have a very structured schedule that includes quite a bit of study time.
Yeah, it's very, very serious. If you get into that world, you'll see it with the other guys there. As I said before, there is definitely a level of professionalism in some of those game types that we probably don't see in all parts of poker. So yeah, great to have him on the show and sort of explain those things to us. So Tricia, where can people find out about your things?
You can go ahead and follow me on Twitter at Dr. Tricia Cardner, or you can go to my website, www.drtriciacardner.com. And you can also find me on Amazon. I've got Positive Poker over there and Excelling at No Limit Hold'em.
And my name is Elliot Rowe, and you can find all of my details on pokermindcoach.com. We look forward to talking to you next week.
Cheers, guys.